Okay, everybody, welcome to our informational webinar for Cohort 3 of the ASCE Engineering for One Planet Mini Grant Program, or EOP MGP for short. We're excited to have you join us today and to tell you more about this program. Before we begin, a couple of housekeeping items. You can interact with us and with each other during the webinar in the chat pod, or you can send us questions directly in the Q&A pod. And after this webinar has ended, you can check your email on a couple of business days where we'll be sending you the slides and the recording. Without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Sarah Delau, who is going to lead this presentation.
Alex, I lost your audio, but I'm not sure if it's just me.
Oh, I think I froze. Wonderful. Shoot.
I just got an alert that my internet is unstable, so I turned off my video. I apologize for that. Can you all hear me?
Mine is too, apparently. Can everybody still hear me?
You're loud and clear.
Okay, so weird. The internet's been just bizarre these past couple days. All right, here we go. Can you see the screen?
I see it, yes.
Okay, cool. Then I will turn it over to Sarah.
Hi, everyone. Sorry, I turned my video off. I got an alert that said my internet was unstable. So if at any point you can't hear me, feel free to let me know, and I'll do my best to close some other windows or whatever else I can do so that we can proceed. I appreciate all of your interest in the EOP MGP program, and I'm very excited that you're all here to learn more, to be able to submit the very best application to us. I am the Research Projects Director at ASEE. I am also the director of this grant. Today, what we're going to do is I'll give you a little overview about the program itself and then about the application. And I want the majority of the time to be for you all to be able to ask questions of us so that we can help you as you prepare your applications and position you in the best way possible to be able to be accepted into this program. So I'd like to start by introducing our advisory board. They're not with us today, but they're very pertinent to this particular conversation because these are the 4 people who not only help us give oversight over the program design as a whole and all of the large scale decisions that we make along the way. But these 4 people will also be the ones that review all of the applications to the cohort that come in. And so if there are any specific questions today that you ask me that I might not be able to answer, what I can do is have a discussion with our advisory board and say, hey, you know, during our info session, this question came up and I wasn't quite sure how to answer it. What do you all think? And in that case, we can certainly promise to get back to you with a particular answer. I may not have all of the answers, but I hope that I will still be very, very helpful to all of you today. On our advisory board is Aisha Lori from Amazon Web Services. She is more or less our industry contact and also someone who spearheads DEI initiatives at Amazon Web Services. David VP Sanchez is a professor at University of Pittsburgh. He is also, actually along with Michelle Marincel-Payne, both of them serve on the division at ASEE, the environmental division. Michelle is a professor at Rose-Hulman Institute of Technology, and Abdul Malik Ismail is a doctoral student. I think he may have now defended. He is at the University of Alabama. We were excited to add him to our advisory board for the second cohort to represent the student voice in this initiative. If anyone has any questions about our advisory board, feel free to drop those questions in the chat. Our ASE project team is large, and I'm excited that we have all of the expertise that we do have to support this program. Dr. Jacqueline El Sayed is our CEO, and the executive director of ASEE now. Before she was promoted to the position that she is in now, she actually made the contacts at the Lemelson Foundation to come up with the idea for this grant funding at ASEE. So she indeed is still the one that's sort of leading this initiative in a sense, but no longer actually actively operationalizing. If you are accepted into the program, you'll notice that she still likes to do the welcomes and the closings of the meetings that we have related to this effort. So there's me again, and then Alex, who you met as she introduced and welcomed everyone today to this meeting. Alex is the director of education and career development. I call her the queen of meetings and slides. She is fabulous in that sense, and will be at the meetings to be able to make sure that everything runs smoothly. And then we have 3 senior project managers, all that have the same titles, but somewhat separate roles along the way in the project. But you will likely be in contact with each of them if you're accepted into the program. You have Akila, Beth, and Kathy. Okay, so let's start by talking about the program. And the program itself, that image that you see on this slide is actually of the EOP framework. The EOP framework is a cornerstone of this EOP initiative. It's the first of its kind to guide coursework, teaching tools, and student experiences that define what it really means to be an engineer who is equipped to protect our planet and the life that it sustains. So really let that sink in for a moment. Like, that is the driving force behind this entire grant project, which also will influence your mini grant ideas. So again, I'll repeat that. It defines what it means to be an engineer who is equipped to protect our planet and the life that it sustains. So we'd be happy to share several resources that are related to this EOP framework, but I highly, highly encourage you to review the resources and this framework itself as you set out to prepare your proposals and your applications for this grant, as it's very important that you connect your ideas to the framework itself. And so the bullets that we see on this slide match the big ideas about the framework. Particularly in this grant, we're interested in curricular innovation, but also in sustainable design, in environmental responsibility, and in DEIJ. I'm sure many of you have already heard of DEI. We like to include the J for justice. DEI doesn't do justice without this additional justice piece here. Okay, so a little bit looking back into the history, which I think is really important. History serves an important role because we can learn from history. And these teams here for Cohort 1 were the very first cohort that we welcomed into this program. They didn't have other teams or previous cohorts that they could learn from. However, they have been very, very impressive in accomplishing what they set out to do. I'm not going to read each of these names of the schools that you see on the screen right now, but you'll notice that they're fairly diverse from different corners of the country, different types of universities. They serve different populations. You even see that there's Art Center, right? So Art Center is an art school. It doesn't mean that there are not departments that may indeed do engineering that aren't called engineering departments. So that's worth mentioning if you are here and you are not from an engineering department itself. Let's look at the accomplishments that Cohort 1 has indeed already accomplished. So we've asked them to submit metrics, and in their final reports, what we did was we added all of the metrics together from all of those teams that you saw on the previous slide. And of those 13 teams, there were 34 new courses that were either developed or modified. So notice that it says developed or modified. I encourage you, as you consider your ideas for applying and submitting an application, your goal is not to have the most impressive idea, and we'll get into some of this a bit later when we go through the details of the application. What we really want is for it to be realistic. So it may not be realistic, given where you're currently at right now, to begin to develop an entirely new course. But there likely are ways that you will be able to modify the curriculum in a course that you are personally responsible for, or have control over in another way. So don't be, when you see these metrics, I don't want them to seem scary to you, to say, wow, they've really done all of that. I'm not sure I'd be able to accomplish all that, so I'm not going to apply. The folks that were in cohort 1 all came at varying levels of where they were in their current journey to integrating EOP and the concept of sustainability as a whole into their curriculum. So it's worth mentioning up front. So of those 34, oops, can you stay back on the last slide for a moment? Of those in those 34 courses, there were 1,615 students that were enrolled in those courses. And there was few grad students, right? So most of these modifications or courses that were being developed affected undergrad students. It'd be interesting if there were ideas for graduate students, but we also understand that that's not necessarily the most natural place to start making changes. And of these 13 teams, there were 48 faculty across all of these innovations in curriculum that had used the EOP framework to inform their course design or teaching during the grant period. What that means is that some of these awardees from cohort 1 may have made curriculum design changes in like their section of a course, but then they may have trained other faculty that also taught that same section to also integrate whatever their innovation in curriculum was at their university. So that number won't always necessarily match the number of people that are on your team in your application. Okay, Alex, sorry about that. Our cohort 2 teams are right now a bit more than halfway through the program. So we were able to support one more team in cohort 2 than cohort 3. There are 14 that you see on the screen here. And again, we really strive for diversity. So you'll see that they, again, kind of span all different corners of the country, similarly to cohort 1. I think in cohort 2, we may have been able to reach a few more MSIs than we did in cohort 1. So in general, we like to really honor, the DEIJ, which was mentioned on a previous slide. And so we are very interested in not only your curriculum intervention itself, but indeed, your need and or who your specific intervention will serve. Okay, so the program goals, now we're getting closer to the application. Specific to this program, there are 2 goals. Those 2 main goals are to incentivize you to integrate these concepts of sustainability into your curricula, whether that means doing something completely new or modifying something that you're already doing. The second is to support the implementation of principles of DEIJ. I see that there is a question in the chat. It says, checking to see if Canadian institutions are eligible to apply for this. I don't want to turn anyone away. What I can say is that when we disperse funds to the mini grant, the funds have to go to a U.S. institution to be able to get to the team lead. In the past, however, we have had institutions that were not U.S. institutions still participate by partnering with a colleague that is from a U.S. institution, and they decided to put in their budget that they would work with someone. So sort of like, let me give an example. If the university in Canada, this Canadian institution, is going to partner with perhaps a colleague from Purdue, then the Purdue the Purdue recipient or the awardee of that money would make sure that they put in their budget that they are partnering with the Canadian institution. And in that sense, we would be able to learn about the implementation of your innovation of sustainable curriculum in Canada as well. I wanted to answer it since I saw it come across in the chat pod, but we'll have plenty more time to ask additional questions later. Okay. So we'll move to the next slide now. Here is a timeline for this program. As you can see right now, it is November, so the application has just opened. If you notice in that first, I guess not really first, but the first row that has content in it, it says application period. That application will be open from, it's already open through mid-January. I think January 10th is that right? January 10th. Yes, January 10th is the deadline for that application. Please do take that deadline seriously. We don't have right now any intention to extend that deadline. I know sometimes people get used to extensions, but please do plan for having your application in before January 10th. And then you'll see there's a bit of time between January and when the actual program kicks off. And that's because we need some time to be able to have our advisory committee look through all of those applications and review them and make sure that they have ample opportunity to ask follow-up questions if there's something that's unclear and whatnot. So then we don't want to start the program without giving you all enough time to be able to save the time in your calendar for the opening meeting. So you'll see these diamonds here represent the meetings or the events. The meetings or the events are green or purple. So the very first community of practice meeting will kick off in May. So that likely falls before the end of the calendar year for academic school years. And we could get everyone together to get on the same page and kick off this grant as an entire cohort before you work through the summer to begin developing your actual curricular change plans. So you'll be designing and developing over the summer, and then we hope that in fall, when you see the next community of practice meeting, that'll be a transition point to where you're no longer developing your interventions for your curriculum and you're getting ready to pilot them. So throughout the fall semester, you'll be piloting those, and we'll have our final community of practice meeting where by that time, you'll have piloted and you will have evaluated your impact and be able to share out all of the exciting accomplishments that you made with the others in your cohort in December. So that's that final green diamond. Now you'll notice also that you see the purple diamonds. The purple diamonds are showcase events. So in June, that first one signifies the ASEE annual meeting. In addition to us providing mini grant funding for you to carry out your, ideas that you are proposing in your applications, we will also be able to support you to attend the annual meeting where you will likely learn from others from even previous cohorts at the ASEE annual meeting. And that will likely help you as you continue to prepare and develop in the summer before you get ready for your piloting, to have all of that opportunity to invite feedback from others beyond your assigned mentors and beyond what you would learn in the original opening meeting for community of practice. And then in January of 2025, we have a symposium, and that symposium is a public event. So we'll encourage you to invite some leaders from your school. So you can showcase all of your accomplishments beyond those that are already taking place in the cohort or have attended the ASE annual meeting. Now, the little piece, the row that I kind of skipped over here is the mini grant program. And I did that on purpose because I knew that I wanted to describe sort of the timeline of your community of practice and your actual work before I talked about the mini grants themselves. So the mini grants are $8,000. and $4,000 will be dispersed to the institution, which you can consider it will go to you as the team lead, but it goes through the institution to get to you. The reason being is that we don't want you to get stuck with taxes on that money. So if it goes through your university to you, that's one way to also make sure that the funds are used for the EOP initiative itself. So the first payment is expected to be made in August. So in time, hopefully, for you to be able to, if you need to buy anything specifically for your intervention before you pilot it, that will be done in time. But that disbursement is contingent upon you filling out your first report to us. You'll have 2 reports due to us. One of them will be, we call it a mid-program report, which is not quite mid-program, right? Because you haven't yet piloted, but we want to know about your progress up until then. So that report will be due, and then if all of the other paperwork is in line and things, we'll disperse the funding immediately after we receive that report. And the same thing again in January of 2025. Now you should have completed your piloting and done your evaluation. We will disperse the rest of the funds after you complete your final report, which includes those metrics that I showed from cohort 1. We right now are collecting metrics from cohort 2, which is why I didn't have the same kind of slide to show you about cohort 2. I think this is a really important slide. So before we move to the next slide, does anyone have any specific questions about the timeline itself? Feel free to drop those in the chat or even unmute yourself if you'd like to ask any direct.
So do you see the questions in the Q&A pod? I can read them to you.
Oh, no, but I can also click them.
That's fine. So there was one that's a little bit earlier that I just want to address. Somebody asked, I missed what you said regarding the people who are not in engineering departments. Can we still apply if our department is offering energy classes? And my plan is to offer sustainable focus classes.
Yes, and I don't think you missed it. What I was saying earlier is that in cohort 1, I think, we had someone from, it was called Art College of Design. They do not have an engineering department. They do design work, of course, right? You do not need to be part of an engineering college or an engineering department to apply for this mini funding. So indeed, if your department is offering energy classes and your application is aligned with more sustainable energy, we would love to see your application.
Okay, question that will be addressed a little bit later. Because the incentive amount will come through the university, will the university deduct indirect cost? We will be talking about that in just a minute.
Yeah, I can answer very briefly, and then we can talk more later. The indirect cost actually is, it will still be deducted. However, Lemelson has asked that a minimum be taken of 15%. I know that there are government rates that are much, much higher, some even more than 50%. We have not had a problem negotiating with universities to say that our sponsor only allows up to 15% indirect. When we go through that entire agreement process, the back and forth will not be with you as a team lead, it will be with your university, and we will do our best to make sure that the most that they take is 15% of the $8,000.
Okay, next question. Looking at the timeline, this looks like it will only be for class in the fall semester. If we want to pilot in the spring semester, is that possible?
It is possible. It's not ideal, but we do understand that. We have had a couple of teams that had said that they wanted to do that. And basically what we have to do is just change the agreement with those specific special cases so that you're able to report your metrics a little later, if that makes sense. You are the 3rd cohort of this program, and our funding for ASEE, it does end after this cohort. However, we have been invited to apply for additional funding from Lemelson. So I don't feel like it will be a problem if we do give extensions for cohort 3. I hope that's helpful.
And when will the winners be announced?
Okay, so the application period ends in January. Our intent is to make sure that we're able to announce in plenty of time that you will have the ability to save the date for the meeting in May. I don't want to promise a date because I am not going to be the person that's responsible for reviewing all of these applications, and it is not, it's not something I can predict to say how many applications we will get. In previous years, we got more than 100 applications for each of the cohorts. So we like to give them a couple of months. I would say that we intend to make sure that we announce by March.
Okay, final question for now. Since you will contact the university for budget, do we have to get approval from our research and grants office before submitting an application?
No, not before submitting the application. We want you to be aware of the fact that when if you are selected as an awardee, that we will be reaching out to them to request that they take a maximum of 15%, but you don't need to get that pre-approval. It's a moot point, and we don't want to waste anyone's time. Let's wait until the awardees are selected, and we will cross that bridge when we get there.
Okay. Okay. I see another question in the chat very quickly. What was the success rate for cohorts 1 and 2 application success rate? I think you sort of said that there were like 100 applications and we awarded 12. So
14, so about 15%. And of those applications, every once in a while we get some duplicates or we get some that are incomplete. So I think that the percent rate may sound a little scarier than it actually is.
Okay. I have one more question.
Okay.
Should the applicant be a full-time faculty member or a researcher tenure who teaches class? Would a researcher who teaches classes be acceptable?
So there's not actually a limitation on who can apply to this. One of the things that we'll look for a strong application is whether or not you have the support to make sustainable changes. So we welcome applications, even from students, from graduate students, from postdocs, from, whether you're tenured or not tenured, that all are welcome. But if you feel like you may be in a position where you feel like you may not be taken as seriously because you are, a younger faculty, someone who has less experience, I would suggest that there are ways that you can make up for that by saying that you have connections and you have leadership support in your application. So I'll say just that much now. And if anyone wants me to elaborate when we get to the application, certainly be happy to do so.
All right, let's move forward and talk about the application.
Here we go. I feel like we've already been talking about it somewhat, but some of the questions are going to be answered here. So it must be a US-based institution to be able to apply. So if you are not from a US-based institution, I highly recommend that you don't lose the interest in this and you find a way to partner with someone as a team member that is at a US-based institution, because look at bullet number 2 from the pre-acceptance. You must have at least 2 or more faculty members on a team anyway. These 2 or more faculty members can indeed be from the same institution, but they need not be. If you're collaborating with someone that is, I think in the past, we may have had even a husband and wife team where we had a husband from a large R1 and we had a wife that was an instructor at a community college. And that was a very interesting application. I think that they were indeed awarded because the advisory committee said, well, that will be really interesting to see whether or not this idea that they have for transforming their curriculum transfers to a 2-year college as well. So those kinds of things. Think about all the little nuances and how you might be able to collaborate with someone else to make a stronger application without being ineligible if you do not fit one of those 2 bullets. The submission of a detailed budget for an award up to 8K. And the reason it says up to 8K is because the amount is exactly 8K across the board for everyone. Everyone will receive the same exact amount. What might change the amount of money that you actually get is some institutions may take 15%. Some may decide that they're going to waive the indirect completely, which means that not every individual will necessarily end up with exactly 8K depending on the indirect rates. The other items that will be required if you are accepted as an awardee will be a letter of commitment and financial documentation, in which we will work directly with your sponsored research office to be able to get these items. They may rely on you for some things, such as submitting a budget to them to match what the $8,000 will be used for, and compliance with the policy of limiting max of 15%, which I think I've said more than one time. Once we get through all of these, which are more or less legalese items, like once the mini grant agreement is complete, for us to disperse funds to you, we need a couple additional things, which is what the asterisk explains at the bottom. We'll need an ACH form, which allows us to directly deposit that money and wire it over to your institution. We'll need an audit report, current audit report, and these things again will be requested, and likely after the agreement is done, they will be very quick to respond to give you these items as well. I see that there's a comment, but it's from Alex saying just keep asking questions if you have them. We'll take time to answer them shortly. So let's move to the next slide. So preparing your application, you'll notice, I think Akila has just dropped the application link in the chat. Probably many of you have already looked at it. The reason I put these 3 questions on this slide are, I don't want to say they're the most important questions, but perhaps they are, because these are the 3 questions that the advisory committee will look at the responses to and assign a score to. So they're going to look at, what's your big picture idea? What kind of changes are you, trying to make so that you're integrating sustainability? That's sort of your big idea there. And we want you to specifically reference that EOP framework in your response. So if that means that you look at the EOP framework and you say, okay, well, this is the specific standard that I will be trying to integrate in, whatever course it is, that's plenty. You don't need to really elaborate on that. We just want to make sure that you have indeed looked at that EOP framework and that you will be using that EOP framework to guide your proposed idea. The feasibility is, I touched on this earlier, it's the second thing that the advisory committee will be rating explicitly. And basically what they want to do is say, okay, well, you have this really, really great idea, but is it going to work? Or is it going to be this really, shining star proposal, but maybe it won't go anywhere? So some things that determine feasibility are, for example, do you have leadership support? That might mean that there's more lasting opportunity for these changes. Another one, be scope of work. So realize that if you're describing something that, when I read the proposed idea, sounds like it's going to cost something much more than $8,000. If that is the case, make sure you address that in your feasibility response. For feasibility, we want to make sure that the scope of what you are proposing to do matches the scope of this money, right? So, and the timeline. So if you're proposing something that's much greater, you can say that you expect that this, will be able to be scaled up in the future, but make sure you focus on only what you can indeed do within the timeline and the funding for this particular grant, which is, as I shared the timeline earlier, more or less a semester. And if you're piloting in the spring, that's fine. You'll mention that in your proposed idea. The impact then, of course, you can't predict this 100%, but how do you envision that this is going to impact students? If you're setting out to instead do some kind of professional development with instructors and, it's not students in a class that are receiving a curriculum that you are proposing, make sure you mention that too. So that's why it says, will others be impacted too? Like, will this be something that impacts students? If so, like, will it be you're piloting it in your course and then you expect that perhaps it could be adopted by additional sections? If it's something that you're saying you would like to partner with industry, maybe there's a different kind of impact. So this is your chance. I can't predict my impact now, but here is what I'm really setting out to do. And here are the people that will be touched by the changes that I'm proposing. It looks like there's a question that says, is leadership support the same support will be from the other 2 faculties in our team? Not necessarily. The faculty members on a team may not include leadership. I know a lot of times leaders are really, really busy, but you could get buy-in, for example, from your dean, who might write a letter of support to say, I have, you know, these 2 faculty or these 5 faculty that are collaborating on this EOP MGP grant, and I really support what they're setting out to do. That would be an example of leadership support. So if you could talk to, you know, your dean or someone of a leadership of any kind of capacity to ask them about sustainability and include that in your application somewhere, that would be fantastic. What if the impact is not quantifiable? And that's fine, right? So qualitative impact is also powerful impact. And sometimes stories are more powerful than numbers. I'm a numbers person, so that's hard for me to say, but it's definitely true. If you think your impact will not be quantifiable, you don't have to say, you know, how many. You notice that number 22 doesn't ask you the same kind of questions as the metrics will at the end of this. If you are selected as an awardee, you'll be required to fill out a metrics report. But for the proposal period, not necessarily. Can I describe some examples of past proposals? Indeed, that is my cue to Aquila to drop in the chat the link to the Cohort 1 page. We have paragraphs about each of their projects, and on that page, you will also be able to click, if you'd like, on it. It's in the chat right now. So once you get to that page, there's also a space where you can see the posters that they presented at the symposium. So that that should kind of hit on all the heads of what kinds of things they proposed. It may not directly say if it was or wasn't feasible, but the fact that they've now done it and were successful in implementing their ideas means that it was feasible. So you'll be able to see the kinds of scale of work and how they may or may not have engaged leadership to be able to be successful. And their impact will also be reported on those posters. So on that page that Aquila just shared, there's little blurbs about each project, which gives the overview, I would say, of their proposed idea, but you can click on the poster itself to see what specifically was funded. I think I answered all 3 questions in the chat pod.
There's one that sort of calls back to an earlier question. Any chance the Canadian institution be a main applicant and partner with the US-based institution, or must it be the opposite way?
I think I'm struggling to understand is so long as the team lead is the one that's from the US institution, the money has to go through the US institution. Does that answer the question? The US institution then would be the one that if in your budget you say that you would like to, for example, you know, of your $8,000, maybe $3,000 will be set aside in your budget for, you know, the time, the resources of the faculty, the items, supplies, and things that you need to be able to successfully pilot also at the Canadian institution. That'll be part of your budget, but that would be like the secondary funding that would come from the US institution to the Canadian institution.
Right, let's move on.
Okay, tips for an effective application. I've been kind of given tips along the way here, but these are sort of big ideas. I really think that you should start your application somewhere in a Word document, in a Google Docs space, or somewhere where you and your team can, you know, rework and revise and reconsider as you prepare. Don't begin typing directly into the SurveyMonkey. I don't have data to back that up to say that of the teams that were funded in the past, that's exactly what they did or didn't do. But I think it makes sense to be organized and be intentional. So sharing and inviting feedback from others on your team, I think will definitely make it stronger in a sense. And just in general, in that SurveyMonkey form, the spaces to type words, it's small. You won't be able to actually see what you'll be able to see if you have it on, you know, in a Word editing document somewhere, to be able to really be intentional about what you're writing. So remember that the character count is 1,000 characters. 1,000 characters is not terribly much. couple paragraphs, right? If that. So be intentional. I would start by making a few bullet points, right? And the bullet points that you're gonna want to include are such as the same kinds of components as SMART goals. Like when you respond about your proposed idea, be specific. If you can be measurable, be measurable. Make sure that it's achievable. Some of these don't match every single item in the list. Like feasibility is the one that more or less matches achievable. Impact, measurable, even if it's not quantifiable, measurable. But in general, the timeline is something you want to keep in mind, and you want to be specific. Make sure that you're telling the advisory committee like very explicitly exactly what you intend to say. They really appreciate, direct and concise responses as well. They don't want to, and this is a change, to be honest with you all, this is a change that we made. In previous applications, we didn't have this character limit, and we were getting sometimes a response to one of the questions that we intended would be a paragraph, and people were putting several pages in there. It was just too much. Not that the idea was necessarily a bad idea, but too much to try to figure out exactly like, is this feasible or is it not? Well, if there's 3 pages about feasibility, it's pretty hard for us to figure out exactly if this makes the mark or doesn't make the mark. So the same way that you would prepare for an interview, a job application package, you're going to want to research a little bit about what they're looking for first. And so that's exactly what I'm telling you. We're looking for brief, concise, and to the point responses. Nothing tricky. It doesn't have to be fancy. Don't use a thesaurus to come up with a word that sounds, like the most intelligent possible word you can say something. Just be very direct to the point. And if anything, and this is a difficult one for me, I'm a bit of a procrastinator myself, is really try to get started. You're all here today, so that's a really great start. You still have a little under 2 months, but there are a couple of holidays during that time. Maybe the holidays is when you're able to find a space and, your head is free from all of the other stresses of university life that you do your best writing. So maybe you want to make sure you set aside time along the way to revisit. You start your application now, soon after this meeting, because what I'm saying is still fresh in your head. And then you invite your colleagues to start, or you take a break and you put it away for a couple weeks, but you set an alert in your calendar that says 2 weeks from now, you're going to revisit this and you're going to say, does this capture exactly? Sometimes if you take a break and you step away and you come back and you reread something, you yourself will find a way that this isn't as clear as I thought it was. I should say this a little bit differently. So here are our tips for an effective application.
All right. I think we are pretty much done. Let's see.
I see, can we have co-leads if 2 faculty members are splitting the workload? We've had co-leads in the past. If that's the case, we still need, okay, there's nuance to this answer. If the co-leads are at one institution, that's easy, and we'd be happy to highlight both of you as, co-leads in all of our publications or whatnot. We would be happy to do that even if you're at 2 different institutions. However, for ease of being able to get you paid, we need to indicate one team lead at one institution, if that makes sense. If co-leads are at the same institution, it doesn't add complexity, and that's totally fine. But if you have 2 co-leads and you're at 2 different institutions, we need to call one of you the team lead to be able to disperse funds only to that one institution, for the same reasons as I described earlier to, I think, someone that was from a Canadian institution.
We have one question in the chat pod. What types of things have people typically included in their budget? Some ideas I'm thinking of are likely to be a lot of time investment, but maybe not cost money.
That's exactly true. A lot of budgets will include staff time, literally to prepare these curriculum interventions over your summer months. It's okay to, put yourself in there as the major, as the recipient of the money, but be cautious about making sure you're not the only person getting money. There are likely some kind of resources that, you know, you could spend the money on in addition to yourself, even if that means that you're going to hire some third-party editor that's not from a team member. For example, that would be one expense. Another might be some kind of, I think it's rare. We had one team that wanted to buy some kind of technology that they needed for their lab that they were going to use for their like lab experiment that they wanted to integrate into their curriculum. But large purchases like a computer are very rare. The majority of the budgets include staff time for most of the team members. Sometimes it would include like an incentive for a student for filling out a survey, for example. Be careful there. I don't want to get too much into it, but if you're going to include things like that, you will also need to work with your IRB to be able to do some kinds of those. You know, you'll need to get permission to be able to administer surveys with students. So I give that example, but I give that example as a warning. Others might be you intend to, you know, buy a training or buy a subscription to a software or something. So long as it's relevant to what you are intending to do, that's totally fine. And again, your budgets at this point are kind of draft budgets anyway, because you're not sure how much indirect your institution is going to take. Anything else?
Those are all the questions that I see, and this is our last slide. So we have another 10 minutes or so.
You might have said earlier when my internet was kind of funky, Alex, is that the attendees of this meeting, all of the participants of this meeting, will get a copy of these slides. So like the last slide you saw had links in it.
Yeah, you can't click them here, but you'll click them when you get them in your email.
Exactly that.
Yeah. We'll hang out for a few minutes in case you have additional questions.
And if you think of some later, feel free to shoot us a message at our EOP alias. We can type that in the chat, I suppose, here.
There it is.
Oh, yeah, there we go. Anything at all? Any other questions?
Hold on. Is there any limitation on where the money can be spent?
No, as long as it's relevant to what you're proposing.
Okay.
Once the money goes to your university, the money then comes to you as what you proposed in your budget. And that's that. We're not going to ask you to provide us receipts or something if that's what you're maybe alluding to.
Will the December webinar be the same content? It will, but a couple of the advisory committee members will be attending the December webinar. So you might want to tune in.
Yeah, and people might come, other attendees with different questions that weren't the same questions in this one.
Yeah.
So I think there's value if you do have the time in your schedule to listen in. There's definitely added potential value. Very, very welcome to everyone saying thank you.
Okay, everyone, thank you so much for joining us today. Keep an eye on your inboxes in the next few days. ASCE is closed tomorrow in observance of Veterans Day. We will send you the slides and the recording. And we have one more question that I don't want to miss. When we implement changes to the curriculum, will the integration span just one semester or will it extend beyond that?
We expect the pilot will happen in one semester. We're hopeful that it will extend beyond that. But the same way that we can't predict, for example, how many applications we'll get, we understand that you can't necessarily predict what happens after you pilot. Some of these things are out of your control. So right now the focus is what is your idea and what will you be piloting? And in that impact, question, you can say what you expect the impact to be. Make sure you focus on the impact of this timeline, which is only that semester, right? The fall semester when you have to pilot it. And if you're not piloting that semester, you can indeed say that your impact will likely be delayed because you're not piloting till spring. If you have space, I know 1,000 characters isn't much, you can add a sentence at the end saying that your goal is to scale this up or institutionalize this such that after your pilot, X, Y, and Z also happens, but that should not be the focus of your response.
Well, I've already said this, and I think it goes without saying that we look forward to receiving your applications. All right. Thank you, everybody.
You all.
And let's end the webinar. Farewell.
Farewell.